repeat myself. So now we move on to the next part of our session. Morag is going to talk about Edinburgh's development of building services around repositories for the institution. Thank you.
I guess I'm going to talk in more detail about exactly what we've done at Edinburgh, both before the RAE, during the RAE, and what we're doing now, to try and give you a feel for what a single institution is doing and what we're trying to cope with. So Edinburgh's got quite a long track record of working with repositories, well, institutional repositories, I guess, because that's mainly the focus of this. So we have the Edinburgh Research Archive, which was launched in 2004, came out of a range of just funded projects around digitising theses, which were a major focus for us at the start. We were an early partner in Sherpa. We were the only DSpace partner in Sherpa, because Sherpa was meant to be an ePrints project, which I think enriched their project, but made things quite interesting for us trying to collaborate. We have a wide range of research outputs. We haven't restricted ourselves entirely to peer-reviewed in that repository, and the repository was full text only. It was very much just, and it was very much just for open access content as well. Anything that wasn't open access we suppressed inside the repository. It's built on DSpace, and we are, as Dublin, on a very early version of DSpace. We're on 1.3.2, so we do think about moving to 1.5 every now and again. And we do have a thesis deposit mandate, and we've had that since 2005, but we don't have a retrospective one, so it's only coming into effect this year. So we're thinking this year about how we're going to cope with the huge input of demand of thesis from our students. As well as what we've done at Edinburgh, Edinburgh has taken the developments we've done for the Edinburgh Research Archive and shared it with other universities in Scotland. So the University of St Andrews, the University of Highlands Islands, and lately the University of Heriot-Watt in Edinburgh are using the same software we use for our institutional repository. And that's a very rich collaboration. They give us lots of ideas, we build it into the software, we build a richer product. It benefits everybody who's involved. And we do that under the aegis of the Scottish Digital Library Consortium. We're also involved with IRI Scotland, which is aiming to build a national hosting, harvesting and search service based at the National Library of Scotland. And there's an involvement of the CDLR in Strathclyde there as well. And we also are involved with Store and StoreLink, which are looking at linking repository outputs, publication outputs more closely with research data and allowing the linkages between those. In terms of the RAE, we developed this as a separate project really from the Edinburgh Research Archive. It evolved from a JISC-funded project called IRA, where we were charged to do RAE stuff for DSpace, and Southampton were doing ePrint stuff for the RAE. It actually led to us building a completely separate repository that isn't based on DSpace at all. And we always thought it probably ought to talk to DSpace, but it didn't at this point. It's a bespoke application that we built in-house on Java and MySQL and Apache Access. It was entirely focused, because of the timescale, on just getting stuff done for the RAE. We seemed to continually run very fast forward, trying not to hit any brick walls. But it was completely just for the RAE. We hadn't really thought about institutional needs beyond the RAE repository, though we knew there would be one. We were just very focused on the RAE. So for the RAE submission, the library was responsible mainly for the bibliographic information, the publication outputs. It wasn't a full text repository, it was only metadata. Primarily it was metadata about journal articles, but there was some other content there. And we had colleagues elsewhere in the university who dealt with all the other stuff about the RAE, like the organisational hierarchy, information about the researchers, grant applications. And we merged these together and gave them to the RAE, and that was our RAE submission. Our role was to liaise with the schools and get content from them. If content didn't exist, which it quite often didn't, they actually hadn't got electronic records, we created them. We spent a lot of time on data cleanup, as I'm sure everybody did. We did an awful lot of data quality checking, trying to find DOIs and all those other wonderful things that were required for the ROE. So it was a very interesting process and gave us a lot of linkage with the schools that we hadn't perhaps had in the area of research publications previously. So after the RE, after we'd all submitted our stuff, sent it off and breathed a sigh of relief, we immediately thought, what will we do next? So the RE repository had validated the value of an institutional repository. The academics were used to working with the library to give us content. And it was the only unique, complete record of what was happening at university, because the schools had their own repositories, and some of the schools still want to keep them, some of the schools want the library to run them. So it's quite a mixed environment at Edinburgh. But they saw the value after the RE of a centrally managed and universally accessed system that was integrated with the campus infrastructure for authentication, information, etc. So that was one of the really good things about the RE. It sort of raised the profile of the value of a tool like this. And they also really liked the work the library had done on data quality, and they obviously liked the fact that we did quite a lot of the work for them. But I think that's probably academics in general. But we did have these new relationships with academics and schools where they had seen the library produce a credible repository and deliver a system that they felt that benefited them. And one of the interesting things is as much about endorsing the repository with school administrators as it is with academics. There's actually school administrators who did a lot of the work for the RAE and will probably continue to do a lot of the work. And they're seeing it as a management tool for them to manage the academics, as well as for the academics to manage their research. So that's quite interesting. But we also had to appreciate that we actually had two repositories. We had the ERA repository, which had things that people wanted to give us, which was primarily self-archiving. And then we had the Publications repository, which was, you have to give us this or you won't be submitted for the RAE. I don't think there's any mistake that the Edinburgh Research Archive's got 1,800 items in it. Publications repository's got 18,000. So maybe it's the difference between having a carrot and a stick, I don't really know. And we had to work out how we were going to take it forward. Were we going to take both repositories forward or move everything on to the Publications repository? How could we learn from the different experience of getting content? You know, the RAE stick that they had to give us stuff, that going out and asking them nicely to give us content. How could we build that into how we develop services for the new repository? And it's fair to say that ERA had largely been a project, and the RAE repository was dealt with as a project. If we were going to take this forward as a service for the university, we had to think about moving these projects into service delivery and in good, stable, sustainable infrastructure. And we also had to think about, did we have to change university policy to support whatever we decided to do with our repositories? So we actually decided to sustain both repositories, mainly because of this issue between closed repositories and open access. So we see the Publications repository, which is what we now call the repository that was derived for the RAE. It's very close. It's a tool for Edinburgh. It's only available to people who actually work in the university. It's not currently available to students because it's seen as an academic tool. And we've had to think an awful lot about incentives to deposit, and I'll come back to that in a wee bit. So we think a lot about adding value, reasons to get the academics to give us stuff. As I said before, we have this disparity between you have to give us it and you ask nicely, you'll give it to us in terms of the levels of content that we get. We wanted to somehow turn the 18,000 items that we had in the RAE repository into 18,000 items for open access. There's an additional difficulty with that in that those items aren't full text. We'll have to go back and ask for full text if we want to make them fully available. We've also developed some new policy that is passing through the university, hopefully as I speak. We're not going for mandates because we think the academics don't like the word. We're going for requirements, and we're going for a dual requirement. There's a requirement to give it to the Publications repository and a different requirement to make it open access, because we appreciate that not everything can be open access. We don't want open access limitations to stop us getting stuff from people. We can deal with open access again later, once they do become open access, but we can't go back and ask the academics again to give us the same information. So we ask the academics once, and then we handle later on the whole issue with open access. And I'll come back to that in a wee minute. So as I said, the Publications repository is a copy of the RAE repository. We've hidden all that nasty RAE information, but we've got all the important content. Move on. And we aim for the publication reports to be a complete record. And we're not just thinking about peer-reviewed, we're not just thinking about academics. There's lots of other people who work in the university who do research, who aren't eligible for research assessment, but whose research is of value and should be in the repository, if we want the repository to be a complete record. It's important that the repository is a useful tool for academics, and actually, as I said before, for school administrators. We want to be able to support research assessment, and we also want to think about preservation. In some ways, we've moved away from open access to thinking about preservation, to thinking about complete records of the content of the university. And in some ways, we also want ownership to belong to the academics and to belong to the schools. So we've opened it up, because the REE repository was very restricted in terms of who could add content. So we've opened it up so that anyone can deposit. The only validity is the validity you place upon your own research. If you think your output is a valid research output, you can put it in the repository. You can edit the records, add keywords so that if you want to indicate that it belongs to more than one research group, or you can just add those keywords. Anything that helps you as an academic or a user get that information out and surface it in ways that are meaningful and important to you. We've done a lot of work on allowing them to manage access to the content, allowing them to decide whether things should be available as open access, whether they should be available to other people in the repository, or just available to them, just available to their pals, just available to their schools. So there's been a lot of work done around that, just partly because we had that feedback from the academics that was something that they wanted. And we're also going to allow it to be managed at various levels, so it's not just the individual researcher. We have to appreciate that lots of individual researchers may not want to engage, but the school administrators do, so we have to allow them to manage it, or manage it at a college level. And we've had a lot of enthusiasm for that approach from academics and administrative staff. So I guess all repositories come down to content. So we want to make sure that it's as easy as possible to get stuff into the repository. So yes, there will be manual data entry, but really we're focusing on bulk loading. Some schools have existing repository systems that they use to manage things internally, and we're building tools and services to load those things easily into the repository, and not just in, but also back out, so that they can enrich their systems as well with the content that we have, and make sure they stay in sync, which is one of the issues we've had in the past. And we're also wanting to be able to split things out into EndNote and Reference Manager, but also allow academics to load from that, so that wherever they have their data, they will be able to get it easily into the repository. And we're thinking about enriching the metadata. Library staff will check the records and make sure that all the metadata fields have been complete, add metadata that they can easily find. But we've also started to write some services that will go out and search on the internet and some of the licensed resources we have, identify maybe missing fields or missing authors or more publication sources, and bring those back into the repository. But we're not going to load those straight into the repository. We're going to offer the academic or the school administrator the option to work out whether they want to pass those through into the repository. There were lots of issues with the REE in terms of how people had to be called and how you handle multiple authors. We want to get that information in more straightforwardly by building tools to do it. We've also built a tool to allow publication lists to be exported, which can be defined by the user and departmental requirements. And it's very customisable, and we're not mandating how it looks or where it appears or anything like that. It's just entirely up to them how they want to surface it. We are talking to the University website project to make sure that the new web pages that they're building for all academics will automatically include this information. But the feedback we got from the schools was that they wanted it to look like their system, and they wanted to have complete control over it. So what we basically do is have a set of menus where you can generate a little bit of XML, and you can plug it into an RSS reader, you can drop it onto a web page, you can do whatever you want with it. You can determine exactly what's available there. This is just in Google Reader. We're able to customise it so you can define what reference appearance you want. So if you want it to be Harvard or MLLE, you can say that, and it spits it out in that particular format for you. We've also retained the Edinburgh Research Archive, but that has changed to be our open access repository. So it still only has content that is open access, or where the copyright has been retained. But it will only contain content derived from the publications repository. So we completely turned off submission through the Edinburgh Research Archive, and submission happens in the publications repository. And then there's a magic widget, which is how I refer to most of my technical colleagues' efforts, that passes things from the publications repository through into ERA for display and for harvesting and cross-search and all that sort of thing. We make sure that the metadata that passes is of good quality. We're not mandating full text anymore into ERA for open access because we think it's important that we represent the full range of research outputs at Edinburgh. And we're planning to do an automatic Romeo check as it passes, before it passes from publications repository into ERA. We're not entirely sure how we're going to do that, but we're going to do it. And we're fairly confident that it's achievable. But we think we need as much information as possible about copyright to facilitate library staff being sure that it is open access before it goes out into the Edinburgh Research Archive. Reports and statistics are a really big deal for repositories, as everybody knows, mainly because it's a really good incentive to academics to give you stuff. We tend to say that if you give us your article into the publications repository and ultimately into ERA, we get about 50 downloads a month. That's our average. We've seen academics being quite cynical about that, put content in, and then the next month come back and go, well, I want to put lots more in because, you know, I've got really good feedback from what's been available and searchable through Google. And we want them to, one of the things we have been approached about is trying to convince some publishers, particularly for conference proceedings, to index the repository. So we are telling academics how the site and when the site has been harvested so they know who's getting access to their content. We have a lot of stuff we still need to do. It's still a challenge to get content, but our partnerships with school administrators is helping with that. We have a lot of work to do with workflows. We're not as sophisticated as my colleagues in Ireland, so we're still working with academics to establish a good workflow and also embedding it into the library because the repositories have primarily been projects. It's not really been seen as a library service, so the cataloguing staff with all that lovely metadata experience haven't been involved, and we need to embed that and make them responsible for that. We're still having to do a lot of advocacy. It's fair to say we're not having to do so much advocacy about the value of giving us stuff for a repository. We don't think our repository is dead. We think it's risen like a phoenix from the ashes. But it's more about copyright clearance and open access and things like that that we're having to do the advocacy for. We, like everybody else, we have to work out what we're going to do with complex objects. We have videos of performances that were submitted for the RE that aren't in the repository. We couldn't work out how to handle them, so we have to work out to do that. There's a really big issue with research data. The library, obviously we have the publication outputs in our repository. Ideally we'd like to link to either where the research data is or ultimately to the research data. We'd like that link to be perpetuated inside the open access repository if the content is open access. But we're not the only players, and we're finding that as we talk to academics, different disciplines have very different approaches. You know, there's the issue about whether they store it locally or they store it in a national service, or whether they want it to be available at all. We're finding that social sciences perhaps like to hang on to some of their data, perhaps longer than some of the other disciplines. So it's flexibility is our watchword. And we want to integrate with other research management systems on campus. We don't have everything integrated at Edinburgh yet. I think we have most of the components, and the university as a whole is trying to bring those things together. But we don't actually have a labelled as such research management system yet. As I said, we want to add more value, mainly to encourage the academics to use it and to make it a more valuable tool to support them. So, as mentioned, the copyright check, content enrichment is quite a big deal for us. We want to support domain and subject repositories so that we can push content out into perhaps PubMed and pull content in from archive, being aware of where academics actually are. Because the first thing the physicist said was, but we use archive, we don't want to use the institutional repository. So then you have to say, well, we still want the stuff because the repository is meant to be a record of everything that the university has done. So we have to be flexible enough to go out and pull it in. And then the medic said, but we don't want to give it to PubMed, we want to give it to you, and you can give it to PubMed. So we have to be aware that different disciplines are going to present different challenges, and just be sure that everything we do is very flexible and very based on the needs that are expressed by the users. Versioning is an issue for us, mainly because it's not supported in either of our repositories yet, but it's on our development list, and we're watching the versions project quite closely to see what we can do. We want to improve searching and usability because the RAE repository was built in such a hurry. The publications repository, which is derived from it, doesn't actually have all the bits and bobs that I would like. We want to do more in terms of embargo support and managing access control. Mentioned research data. We have ambitions to add LCSH keywords, but we'd rather go and get them off the internet and load them automatically than get cataloguers to type them in. We have to think about collaborative working environments, allowing people to work on papers as they generate them rather than just depositing the final versions. I'm just going to mention preservation and move rapidly on. And then there's social networking, tagging, clouds, that sort of thing. And there's always the need to improve statistics to prove that there's value in the repository for the users. So that's me.